In today's video, I'm going to be tackling yet another technique from the Lego Builder's Handbook and really building upon the technique that I covered last time, overlapping bricks. This is another key foundational structural technique, and that's vertical joints and slope roofs. So additionally, I want to take these techniques and challenge myself to build a fairy cottage that I can then put into the city. So let's get building. So thankfully for me, this is a pretty simple and straightforward technique that we're learning today. After maybe building for 5 or 10 minutes, I feel like I understand how these vertical joints could be created, and then furthermore, why we would want to avoid them in certain situations. Just like the overlapping brick technique that we learned last time, this is to ensure a structurally sound build. However, this is more about the vertical seams rather than some of those horizontal seams previously. So in this scenario, we can see we've used some 2x4s on the bottom, as well as some 2x4s on this second layer. But because we're working with an even number of studs here and the same number, that 4, you can see that each little module is kind of its own little section. And again, when we're trying to build something really strong and sturdy, this isn't going to quite cut it for us. Similarly, if we're using some maybe different sized bricks on top for either visual interest or, we think we're trying to interlock by using different sizes, we run into the same problem where this 2x4 on the bottom is also 4 studs long for all of these 2x2 bricks. Or 1x2 bricks rather. So we run into that exact same problem. Each 2x4 brick on the bottom is kind of its own separate section or module, and this whole thing is not interconnected. To avoid that, there's a couple things we can do, but first and foremost, instead of using that 2x4 brick structure on the bottom, let's use some 1x bricks. That will make sure that we're breaking up where those vertical seams sit. So you can notice on this side, we have a mix of some 1x2s and some 1x4s, whereas this side of the structure, we have exclusively 1x4 bricks. And that makes sure that the vertical seam that's showing up over here is not in the same place where the vertical seam shows up over here. And so that makes sure that even though we're still using the same 1x2 bricks on top, this whole thing is really one solid structure because those vertical seams are aligning differently on the different sides. Using that same logic with the 2x4 brick instead of just that 1x2, maybe we need a wider wall or we're working on a wider structure. Still using the 2x4s on the bottom here, but again, mixing up some of that length with these 2x2s. So by changing where this vertical seam sits right here, you can see that this is going to overlap differently than what's on the other side. And that really allows for a strong, interconnected, one whole piece structure. Sloped roofs can be built in a ton of different ways. Today, I'm focusing on just 2 approaches, using standard bricks versus using sloped pieces with a 1-stud offset. Now, believe it or not, before Lego ever made slope bricks, builders would use regular 2-stud wide bricks, offsetting each layer by 1 stud to create a makeshift slope. It's a clever technique, and it worked. But once Lego introduced slope elements, the game totally changed. Fast forward to today, and there are more than 60 unique slope elements in Lego's inventory. We've got everything from sharp angles to gentle curves, even inverted slopes to really customize your design. Since this is my first real mock, I'm keeping it simple. I'm not going full old school with basic bricks, but I'm also not diving into anything too complex just yet. But before I start stacking bricks, I need to figure out what kind of fairy cottage I actually want to build. When I started dreaming up this build, I knew I wanted something that felt deeply rooted in the forest, like it had grown right out of the ground over time. I'm thinking mossy rooftops, woodsy, masonry bricks, more organic shapes, and of course, just a touch of whimsy. I really want my color palette palette to lean heavily into earthy, natural tones with some white to complement them. One of my favorite details is the moss creeping between different layers of this structure, almost like nature is slowly reclaiming the building. It gives a lived-in, enchanted feel, and I think that's the main image I'm going to model my fairy cottage after. I imagine this is the kind of place a woodland fairy might return to after a long day in the forest. Very cozy, natural, and right at home in the 100-brick forest. Okay, so I think that I've gathered, for the most part, the main parts and pieces that I'm going to need for the core building. I wanted to make sure that I grabbed a variety of lengths within both the white and the tan color scheme. As we're doing all of this overlapping, I'm confident we're going to work with a variety of different lengths so that we aren't creating those vertical joints. And then additionally, I really want to make sure that I'm bringing a little bit of detail in here, even if it is only a little bit. But I realize that I have a number of these white masonry bricks, and this is a perfect way to incorporate them. And then I also have quite a few of these curved bricks as well. And I think that if I have enough, these are going to look so much better on the corners of the building instead of having those really harsh, pointy 90-degree corners. We will see what happens, but I think there's no better time than now to get started. Let's build. With my vision set and the mood board in place, it was time to dive into the build, and I started from the ground up. Since this week's focus was avoiding vertical seams, I paid special attention to brick placement right from the start by counting out the studs, making sure I had my math correct. I then added my interior layer since I knew the next layer of bricks was perpendicular and therefore at least 2 studs. I was so one-track minded, I got my first layer down and then realized that I've got a door that needs added. After a few slight adjustments, I got the door all figured out. I continued to cruise right along until I was starting the 3rd layer. This is the moment where I realized things didn't go exactly as planned and were about to get a little chaotic. Like I said before, I originally wanted to use curved corner pieces to give the cottage a soft, whimsical feel. But once I started building, I completely forgot to incorporate them and defaulted to just using regular bricks, meaning my organic fairy cottage had turned into a sharp 90-degree box that I very specifically said I did not want. Only after removing a few bricks did I realize that I needed to start these walls over. Swapping the corners out for curves meant I couldn't place anything but another curve on the inside stud of that curved brick. Not a huge problem, just another pivot to reduce the size of the inner wall to account for that. After rebuilding the first few layers multiple times, I finally got the curves worked into the cottage. I naively assumed that would be the last of the rebuilding, but I miscounted studs when placing those curved corners, so after one last rebuild of those first few layers, I was finally able to continue forward and everything felt a lot smoother. After looking at the front door for a bit, I wanted to change the shape to something curved that matched my mood board. I removed only a few bricks and replaced them with these arches, which I think look a lot better. However, I felt like I was still missing something here, which I do end up adding when I top this floor off. Just a few more bricks, and the first level was finally complete. This first floor ended up being 12 by 12 studs and 6 bricks tall. Wow. It feels like every time I do a project, it always seems to take way longer than I expected. I mean, 5 hours ago, I was saying how this is a really simple and straightforward technique, which it is. And yet, I think I rebuilt portions of this 3, maybe 4 times. Oh boy, but we got there. Very excited about it. Took a little bit of trial and error to make sure that I could get the door opening and closing. As you probably saw, I had to leave a single brick gap right there. Otherwise, the door was hitting it and just, oh, now I can't, there we go. Okay, that scared me. I couldn't even open and close it. So now I can, and it's on the inside. So that's great. You can't even see it. Obviously, I am not at all concerned about an interior right now. I'm just focusing on building. But interior details will come eventually. But there's probably one glaring problem here that you're probably screaming at me like, hello, we have vertical joints and seams right here on every single corner because of these curved pieces. To which I say, you were right. However, that is just unfortunately avoidable. You're not unfortunately avoidable, unfortunately unavoidable. We don't have a piece that can interlock these curves. And even if we look at least like the next size up that I have, it's just a completely different shape curve. And it's never going to correctly interlock this this smaller curve. It just doesn't fit. It's a completely different shape. So unfortunately, it did have to be a singular stack, but it's only 6 tall. It's not too bad. And what I'm going to do to then interlock it is the top plate layer. So I will go ahead and put these on top, which is going to interlock at least those stacks down. Is this way over engineered for this little build? Probably. But did I utilize the new technique I learned? Yes. Yes, I did. Capping the level off with green plate was perfect to serve as the moss base layer. I wanted it to feel like the forest had gently crept its way into the walls, so I played around with different clips and attachments until I found a look that felt natural with the moss growing in a downward angle. I added a few bricks to reference where level 2 was going to be. Then I used a mix of limb pieces, leaf elements, and curved slopes in my green color palette to fill in those gaps and make everything feel really full but still whimsical. For the second and third level, I just repeated the same process, with much less trial and error. With the corners figured out and my system in place, it came together quickly. This part felt like tying a bow on everything I'd learned so far. And finally, it was roof time. I tried out a few different slope styles before landing on a mix of 45-degree slopes in various widths and earthy tones. I mainly used reddish brown to give it that woodsy feel, but sprinkled in some sand green and dark green to mimic that aged and mossy look. I used the one-stud offset technique to create a smooth, studless slope, and added some 1x8 and 2x8 bricks in the middle of the pitch to support those slopes as I built them. Halfway through building the roof, I realized the window on the third level was just a bit too low and it kind of felt off balance under the pitch. So I did a quick rebuild to move it up. A small fix, but I think it made a big difference in the final look. And to cap everything off, I used cheese slopes at the peak to close the gap and finish the roof line. And just like that, my very first fairy cottage and mock was complete. Guys, I freaking did it. I could not be happier with how this turned out. I honestly feel like it just totally exceeds my expectations. Halfway through, I kind of wanted to just rip it all apart and start over. I really had to trust the process on this one. And that's also coming from someone who procrastinated the absolute crap out of this roof. I did not want to start whatsoever. I found it really intimidating, honestly. I'd never built one before, just completely on my own, only from Lego sets that are way more complicated than this. So the fact that I did it all on my own and just kind of pushed through really makes it that much sweeter to me. So I am so happy to be able to get this into the city. I think it's going to be a great addition, but that being said, I would also really love to know your guys' ideas, thoughts, suggestions, if you have any ways to maybe make this better. I'm always looking to learn new techniques. Obviously, that's the whole point of what I'm doing here. So additionally, if you have any ideas for any future builds, I am going to continue working my way through the Lego Builder's Handbook and learning new techniques. And I want to continue to challenge myself to use those techniques immediately, get that hands-on experience. So if you have any ideas, please leave a comment down below. I would really love to hear them. And additionally, if you like this type of content, if you want to continue exploring new Lego techniques with me, please consider subscribing. You can also watch the video on screen now where I went through and learned a similar but different overlapping brick technique. And I'll see you in the next one.